Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our monthly speaker series. Our speaker today is Dick Sonberg, who has resided in Tide Point for over 5 years. Dick has an interesting and varied background, including practicing law in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 38 years. Graduated with a degree in math and physics from St. Lawrence University, and then earned a degree in mechanical engineering at Columbia University in 1955. After 4 years as a sales engineer in Tulsa for Ingersoll Rand Corporation, he married his wife, Katie, and attended law school at the University of Colorado. He and Katie returned to Tulsa in 1964, and he worked for a large law firm until 1972, when he organized his own law firm. Dick has a long and successful career in the law, but that's not his topic of discussion for today. While active as a full-time lawyer, he also became very active in a number of other businesses, which he organized and managed. That's what he calls his career as an entrepreneur. And that's his topic today, entrepreneurship. He's going to explain from his experiences just what the principles necessary to be a successful entrepreneur. Many of you probably have gone down a similar path in your business career, but Dick has some specific observations to guide one's method and decisions over the years. Please welcome Dick Sonberg.
Thank you, dear friends. I appreciate your coming here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to give you this talk, and I really appreciate the fact that Lee Lopez set up this talk series. I think it's a great idea to allow our members to get a little better idea of what we all did in our lifetimes. And as he points out, my topic today is entrepreneur. That's a French word. And we have the exact same word and the exact same definition. And it means to take on a project and carry it forth, and hopefully it succeeds, but bear all the risks. So it's not an easy task. You have to work hard at it. The word entrepreneur that we use comes from a couple of Latin words, inter and prehende. And that means, in translation to English, to grab control. And that's really what an entrepreneur does. He grabs control of what he sees out there and tries to make it into something. And so you try to start a new enterprise and bear the risks and get the rewards. Yesterday, strangely enough, was my 88th birthday. So I'm going to go back exactly 80 years to when I was 8 years old. My family, we grew up in White Plains, New York, and many of you probably know where that is. And we had a cottage on a lake about 30 miles north of White Plains called Peach Lake. And it's a medium-sized lake, and it had retirement communities all around it. And my family owned a cottage there back to 1925. And we spent all of our summers there. And I had an older brother. He's 2 years older than me, Donald. And we were very close. So in the summer that I was 8 years old, 1941, he and I came upon the idea that we were going to open a business. We were going to sell worms to the fishermen on Peach Lake. And there were a lot of good fishing in Peach Lake. There were perch, there were bass, white perch, yellow perch, sunfish, catfish. You go out fishing, you had to catch something, especially you had the right worms. And we were going to get the right worms. So our father would go up in the evening to the local golf course at Vales Grove, where our cottage was, and go to the greens with a flashlight, and the night crawlers were all over the place. They weren't killing them in those days. So there were a lot of night crawlers available that he brought back to us. We'd put them in a big box with dirt, and that was our inventory. And we sold a lot of worms, 10 cents a dozen. Well, it didn't make us rich, obviously, but it gave us enough money for Coca-Cola and ice cream bars. So we were happy about that. We did that for about 3 years, and that was a lot of fun. My next endeavor was when I went into junior high school in White Plains, which was 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. I decided I'd get a paper route. We had an evening paper, the Reporter-Dispatch in White Plains. And they wanted young boys to come and get the papers at a collection point every night and deliver them to houses in a route that was assigned to them. So I made a deal with them. You weren't an employee, you were an independent contractor, and you were in control of your route. So they gave me a route that was pretty much in my neighborhood. And it had 75 customers at the time I took it over. By the end of the first year, I had over 200. So I solicited suckers pretty quickly. And the way I delivered the papers was they'd come in a big bundle, and you'd fold them all up into a little square, and I had a great big basket on the front of my bike. And I would ride that bike around and throw the papers up on the porch of these houses. That worked pretty well, and I did that all through junior high school. My next endeavor was really when I got to high school, in the summertime. At Peach Lake, where we lived, the owner of the facility, the Vale family, they had what's called a pavilion with a soda bar and a little snack area, and they rented boats and things like, and they needed a lifeguard and all. And a lot of the guys my age would take a job there. And that didn't cater to me. I wanted to do something different. My father had been an automobile dealer in White Plains before the war, and he was still working there as an accountant. So I said, Dad, you must know some of the dealers in White Plains. Do you think you could introduce me and I could possibly get a job washing cars for the dealers? Now, Lee knows all about this. His grandson comes in here and washes your car. So that's what he introduced me first to the Nash dealer. You remember Nash? In fact, the first car I ever owned was a Nash. But anyway, he agreed. He said, Dick, if you'll come in twice a week and wash all of the new cars and the used cars in my lot, we'll make a deal of how much I pay you per car. So I made a deal with him to come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then my father introduced me to the Chevrolet dealer. And I went to talk to him, and he said, okay, it's a deal. I said, I'll come in on Wednesday and Friday. And so that's what I did for 2 or 3 years during high school, was and in the summertime, was go down and wash those cars at those dealerships. And made fairly good money, and I was able to put some money back in the bank in a savings account to take to college with me. I graduated from high school in 1950, June of 1950. And that fall, 1950, I enrolled in St. Lawrence University, as Lee explained, and went there and majored in math and physics. And I did quite well. And when I was a junior, my advisor said, Sonberg, he said, I know you're active in journalism. I was a sports editor of the newspaper and sports director of the radio station, and traveled with the hockey team, which was a nationally ranked hockey team, and also with the football team. So I enjoyed that, and I was thinking about making that a career. My advisor, the head of the physics department, said, Sonberg, you're wrong. He said, you're good in math and physics. Why don't you go to engineering school? We've got a 3-2 engineering program. You go 3 years here at St. Lawrence and major in the math and physics, and then transfer to an engineering school, and you get a degree from both at the end of 5 years. So they had MIT, RPI, and Columbia as the choices for engineering. And by going to Columbia Engineering, I could stay at home in White Plains and commute in every day and save my family some room and board money. So that's what I did. went to Columbia Engineering School for 2 years and graduated in June of 1955, and then went to work for Ingersoll Rand Company. Maybe some of you know about Ingersoll Rand. It's grown quite a bit since I worked for them. But at that time, their principal product was heavy-duty machinery that they made at 3 different plants. And they made a lot of oil and gas field equipment, pumps and compressors and things like that. And they assigned me originally to the home office at 11 Broadway, New York City, and put me in the oil and gas department, which I really liked because I wanted to learn about oil and gas. And I worked there for 2 years. And then the head of the department in New York came to me, and he said, "Dick, we're going to sign you down to Tulsa, Oklahoma as a sales agent." And he said, "I think you're ready. You worked hard here. I think you'll do a good job. And Tulsa is a good oil and gas community, so you'll enjoy it." So that's what I did. In the spring of 1955, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and started working for Ingersoll Rand there. And I did that for 2 more. That was in 1957. Did that for 2 more years. In late 1958, I joined an adult group at First Presbyterian Church in Tulsa when I moved there. I was a Presbyterian, sadly. And I joined that group and became very active in it. Most of the people in it were college students, but I got to know them really well and actually became the president of the group. And in late 1968, I think it was, I'm sorry, 1958. 1958. Get my dates straight here. It's right in front of me. I met Katie. She joined the group and became very active in it. And we got along pretty well and started dating and became pretty close. So I think it was in late June of 59, excuse me. Late June of 1959. I proposed to Katie and she accepted. And she was a senior at that time, graduating from nurses training at a local hospital. And she was ready to go out and be an RN. And she's done that for her career, and she's really good at it. I must say that. Well, unexpectedly, she accepted my proposal. And then I told her the real story. I said, "Now, I'm going to leave my job at Ingersoll Rand. I want to go to law school." And I don't know how she felt about that, but she was cooperative and supportive. And I applied to and was accepted at the law school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And we got married on September 11th. That's a notable date, isn't it? 1959. So it's been 62 years, I guess, 59 years, 59 years. My math is failing me. But anyway, got married on September 11th, which was a Saturday, and I had to enroll in law school on the next Monday. So we hopped in the car and headed to Boulder, Colorado, which was about a 2-day drive. But we got there, and I enrolled in law school, and it was a 3-year course, and I finished it in 2.5 years. During my 2nd and 3rd year, I did a little entrepreneurship of a sort. I sought out a law firm in Denver, a medium-sized firm. Had about 6 or 7 lawyers. And got a job as an intern lawyer for those 2 years. Well, I'd go over there every afternoon after class at Boulder and get the bus and take the bus over to Denver and work at Welburn and Dufford. That was the name of the firm. And learned a lot. And I thought if I did a good job, I must have, because when I graduated in February of 1962, they offered me a job, full-time job as a lawyer, a real lawyer. And I passed the Colorado bar, and I went to work for Welburn and Dufford. And I did pretty well with them, and I was doing corporate law and a little bit of oil and gas, but there really wasn't much oil and gas in Denver at that time. early 1964, Katie and I started talking about moving back to Tulsa. That's where her family was. That's where she had grown up. She loved Tulsa. And the several years that I spent there as a sales engineer, I loved it too. So I said, okay, let's go back to Tulsa. And I called around and I got some help and got a job at the largest law firm in Tulsa at that time, Houston, Klein, and Davidson. And I went to work for them in April of 1964. And they put me in the litigation department, which is something I had not done at all in Denver. Their principal litigation was defending medical malpractice cases. They represented an insurance company that covered the medical malpractice on virtually every doctor in the state of Oklahoma. So we had lawsuits all over the state to defend. And I got right in the middle of it in a hurry and got my feet on the ground and learned how to go to the courthouse and prepare briefs and argue cases. And I thought, I was doing pretty well at it. 2 years later, in 1966, Joe Houston, the senior partner in the firm, comes to me and he says, Sonberg, we're going to put you in the corporate law department. You're doing well in litigation, but we think you'd be better with your background and experience in corporate law. And they had a nice clientele of oil and gas companies in Tulsa, independent oil and gas companies. And I said, Joe, if you do that, I'd like to concentrate in the oil and gas area. I've got the background from Ingersoll Rand, and I think I could do well in that. He said, you've got it. And that was the key to my future success as an entrepreneur. I'm going to name two of the clients that they had that became very close to me, and I did a lot of work for them. One was a company called Service Drilling Company, which was headquartered in Tulsa, independent contractor. They had 8 drilling rigs in western Oklahoma, and they also drilled wells for their own account. So they were very active. And Ed Smith was the president, and his son Sherman Smith was the executive vice president. And they both were very, very knowledgeable and very easy to get along with, and I really enjoyed my relationship with them. The other firm was Lee Keeling and Associates. And that firm was what we call an oil and gas consulting firm. They would review oil and gas wells and determine the value of them for oil and gas companies that had drilled the wells and for banks, and did a lot of review of prospects for companies to determine whether or not they were valid. So they were very active, and I became very close to Lee Keeling and his executive vice president, Ken Renberg, and did a lot of things with them. So anyway, that's what I was doing from 1996 to 1966 to 69. 1969, Ed Smith calls me on the phone, Service Drilling. Come over here, Sonberg, I want to show you something. Well, I get over there, and there's a geologist in the conference room with them, and they've got a prospect they want to drill in Pawnee County, which is just west of Tulsa, about 60 miles. So I said, well, that looks like a good prospect to me. I'm not a geologist, but it sounds pretty good. And so Joe says, Ed Smith says, Sonberg, we want you to take a piece of this well. We want you to get close to us. So I said, I haven't ever invested in an oil well. He said, well, now's a good time to start. This is the best shot you'll get in a long time. So I said, okay, how much would it cost to take 20% of it? And he gave me the number, and it was within my budget. I'd had some money put aside for investment. So I said, okay, I'll do 20% from the ground up. I would pay my fair share all the way across. No promotion, but I'd pay my fair share. I went back to Houston, Klein, and Davidson and went into Joe Houston's office, and I said, Joe, I just made a deal to go into a well with Service Drilling Company. Ed Smith presented to me. And Joe Houston looked at me, and he said, oh, Dick, what a serious mistake. He said, I invested in an oil well one time, and it was dry, and you lost all your money. That's what you're going to have happen. And I said, well, okay, Joe, maybe you say that, but I'm going to go ahead with it. Well, we drilled the well, and it came in gangbusters. And it was a good producer. And it produced for about, I guess, 12 years, and then we sold it to another company. So I made a lot of money out of it and was very successful. And that was my entree as an entrepreneur in the oil business. And it really caught on to me. So about a year later, 1970, Ed Smith calls me again. He says, Dick, come on over here. We're going to have a meeting, and you need to be in on it. So I go over there into their conference room, and Sherman and Ed are in there, and there are about 4 other guys. The mayor of Tulsa was there. A fellow who owned a big steel company in Tulsa was there. A retired executive vice president of Sunray DX Company was there. And a retired president of Sinclair Oil and Gas was there. I mean, it was an austere crowd. And there I am sitting in the corner. No, I wasn't at the corner. I was right up at the table. And they said, now, here's what the deal is, Dick. Public Service Company of Oklahoma wants to develop natural gas for their own account. And they need a company that'll go out and get prospects together and drill them. And then eventually they'll buy out that company. And we want to start that company, and Ed Smith is very, very strong on you, so we want you to start the company. Well, that really surprised me, but I organized a new Oklahoma corporation. I called it Western Diversified Industries, Inc. And all of these gentlemen who had been in the room, plus myself, became shareholders, and we negotiated a contract with Public Service Company of Oklahoma so that we would put prospects together, we would do the leasing and put up the money for the leases. And then they would put up the money to drill the wells on those leases. And we'd have 25% of the deal. So that was really pretty good. And we negotiated, Ed Smith and I negotiated that contract. And everybody in the stockholders of the Western Diversified, they were all very happy, of course. And we started out, and we hired a couple of geologists and a landman who would go out and buy the leases. And we really built up a good-sized company and leased about, 15, 18 prospects around the state. And PSO put up the money to drill the wells. And 80% of them, they were all wildcats. And 80% of them were successful. So that's pretty good in the oil and gas business, folks. That's a way above average. So we obviously had a couple of good geologists working for us, and we were all very happy. And at the end of 4 years, PSO came to us. We had Lee Keeling. I don't think they knew about my relationship with Lee Keeling. They suggested we use Lee Keeling, evaluated all the wells, and bought our interest out of those wells, our 25% interest, and paid us back what we had put in originally as stockholders. So again, it was a brother-in-law deal. It was really good, and it turned out well for me, and I was very happy about it. I skipped by a particular date that was important in my life. I'd been with Houston, Klein & Davidson since 1964. In 1972, after I had organized Western Diversified and was running it, I resigned from the firm, and another young lawyer in Tulsa, Pat Waddell, who was also leaving a big firm, we organized our own firm, Sonberg and Waddell. And we started doing business for ourselves. And fortunately, we both were able to bring a cadre of clients from our old law firms that we worked for who wanted to stay with us. And particularly Service Drilling Company and Lee Keeling, they were very close to me, and they stayed as a client. And I did a lot of things with them after that. But anyway, so I was practicing law at my own firm by 1972. I told you the public service bought out Western Diversified about 1974. 1975, I can remember it so well. Again, Ed Smith calls me. And he said, Dick, come over here. I got another deal for you. And that's the way he was. He was just so great. And I said, okay, Ed, I'll be over there this afternoon. Went into his office, or actually the conference room, and he and Sherman went in there, again, with two geologists, Paul Lyons and Alan Benenson. And they had both, about 2 years before that, retired from Sinclair Oil and Gas, and they had great experience. And they had come to Ed Smith and said they had developed a prospect for natural gas in southeast Oklahoma that had never been drilled and looked like a real good place to drill some wells. And so we reviewed their geology. We took it to a geologist in Lee Keeling's firm, and he reviewed it, and it looked very legitimate. And it was a fairly good-sized prospect. It covered 2 townships, and a township is 36 square miles. You know, that's in Oklahoma, they platted it all out like they did in other states, sections and townships and ranges and so forth. So this prospect covered 2 townships. So I made a deal with Service Drilling Company. I set up a new company called Venture Exploration, Inc. And I went 50-50 with them on doing this prospect in Haskell County, Oklahoma. And I put together the company Venture Exploration, and I brought in some of the people that I've developed a good relationship with, and they became stockholders of Venture. We ended up with 7 stockholders, including myself. And I was the president, and I ran it, and I worked very closely with Service Drilling on that prospect. And we had a landman go down there and lease most of it that we needed the acreage for. And then we decided to drill the first well. And so they were drilling it down there in Haskell County, which is about a 2-hour drive from Tulsa. And December of 1976, I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from Ed Smith. Holy God, Dick, we got a barn burner. So we jumped in the car, got a cup of coffee, 3 o'clock in the morning, drove down to Haskell County, and we were driving close to the area where the well was being drilled, and you could see a glow in the sky. They were venting the gas as they completed the well. They had to vent some of it, and so they burned it off into the atmosphere. I guess the environmentalists don't like that. But anyway, that's what was going on, and we completed that well, and we put it on production, and it made about 4 million cubic feet of gas a day, which was a pretty good well because it wasn't quite that deep, and it was very successful. And what it did is it proved up the efficacy of the whole project, really, because of where it was situated within the acreage. And so we decided we had something good. And Sherman Smith came up with a great idea. He said, Dick, he said, I've got these 2 companies that I've drilled wells for out in western Oklahoma, in the Panhandle. And one is in Dallas and one is in Fort Worth. They're independent operators. And I think I can get them to come in and drill some additional wells on these prospects, scattered around so we prove up some more acreage. And we'll go from there. So we made a deal with them. John Castleman and Irene Wisher, I'll never forget them. I hadn't met them before, but they were very, very knowledgeable, good oil and gas people. And the deal we made was that they would drill and complete 4 wells on the prospect. And if they were successful, they would stay in the prospect. Everybody would get a quarter interest in the total prospect, including the wells already drilled. And we'd go from there and drill the additional wells on a 25% each basis. So Venture Exploration, my company, was ending up with a quarter interest in a very, very promising prospect. And with the 5 wells that we'd already drilled, we had a pretty good supply of gas coming out of them. Sherman and I went to 2 major gas pipeline companies, Columbia Gas and Tennessee Gas. And we negotiated a contract with both of them, a 25-year gas contract to buy the gas off the wells in our prospect. And they agreed to pay us $3 a thousand above the going wellhead rate in Oklahoma at any point in time. Couldn't get a better deal than that. So we signed a contract with them, And then the four of us went together and we drilled 12 more successful wells, not a single dry hole. And we had 17 wells on that prospect and a lot of gas, and we made everybody happy, all I can say. And 10 of those wells are still producing. And fortunately, I still have an interest in them. So that was a very successful venture for me. And I made a bunch of shareholders very happy, I'll tell you that. And with that success, well, it was still really going on as far as drilling the wells down there. In 1979, I decided I'm going to go and do some additional oil and gas exploration. So I organized another new company. And at that time, I had developed a very close relationship with a really neat guy in Boston, Massachusetts, Charlie Downer. And he was interested in the oil business. And he had a lot of good friends who could put money in the oil business. So I said, Charlie, let's organize a company that you and I will own, and we'll develop limited partnerships. And your friends, and I've got friends that'll put money in, and we'll drill wells every year. We'll have a new partnership every year, which was very common and still is common in the oil and gas industry to do it through limited partnerships with investors. So I organized a new company, and I called it Sundown Exploration. Sun, a play off of Sonberg, and Down, a play off of Downer. And that's where I come up with the name. And we started Sundown Exploration, and our first program was in 1980, and we drilled about, we didn't actually drill the wells. What I did, I didn't have any operations. I invested with other independent companies around the state that had good records and were successful operators. And I would take a piece of various wells that they were going to drill. And sometimes I'd take 5%, sometimes I'd take 15%. I think the most I'd ever take was probably 25%. But that's how I would spend the money of our Sundown Exploration limited partnerships. And the first year we participated in probably 15 wells. And I did that for another 4 years. And all total, probably a little over 100 wells by Sundown Exploration. And again, fortunately, we had an 80% success ratio. So it turned out to be a successful venture again. And 1985, the oil business in Tulsa, or in Oklahoma, started to deteriorate. The price of oil was going down, the price of gas was going down. It was hard to sell the oil. The Arabs were causing a lot of problems. So I decided, I went to Charlie and I said, Charlie, I don't think we ought to be doing any more partnerships. We can't do our partners a good turn. So we didn't, and we kind of shut it down. But we had what we had, and we were getting money out of that. I'm going to go back a ways now to a different venture that I got involved in outside the oil and gas business. I'd always been a very active baseball player when I was a kid. I played Little League ball. I played on the high school team, an American Legion team that won the state championship twice. And I played at college for 2 years at St. Lawrence. So baseball was really in my blood, I'll tell you that, and it still is. But anyway, in 1973, I opened the paper one day at breakfast, and there was an ad on the sports page, baseball team for sale, $1. Boy, did that get my attention. At that time, Tulsa had a AAA franchise team from the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, AAA is the highest level of minor league baseball. That's where the players are that are going to next move up to the big leagues. There's single A, double A, and AAA in pro baseball. So this AAA team was owned by a fellow by the name of A. Ray Smith, who was a well-known guy in town, and I didn't know him, but I called him on the phone immediately, and I said, Mr. Smith, what is all this about, $1? He said, come on out and we'll talk about it. So I went out to his office at the ballpark, and he said, it's not really for sale for $1, Mr. Sonberg. I said, don't call me Sonberg, call me Dick. And we became very close friends after that. what he needed was some financial help. And he said, if I don't come up with it, the Cardinals are going to move the team out of town. And I'd hate to lose it, and I think the town would hate to lose it. So I said, hey, Ray, I think I can help you. I've had an oil company that is, the stockholders are all the top people in the city of Tulsa, from the mayor on down. And I think I put together a group to come in as stockholders in your Tulsa Oiler baseball team. That's what he called it, the Tulsa Oilers. And we'll keep it here and we'll do well. So that's what I did. I put together a group of 7 others, plus myself as 8 stockholders, and we bought a 50% interest in the Tulsa Oilers and put money in to rehabilitate it financially. And the Cardinals were very happy about this. They wanted us to stay in Tulsa for their AAA team. And they gave us some very good players over the next few years. And we won the American Association pennant 2 or 3 times. And it was a great, great experience in baseball. And it was successful, and we were doing well. In the fall of 1978, just after the season ended, A. Ray calls me. And I'd been very active in the management. I was the executive vice president, if that meant anything, of the Tulsa Oilers. But I did a lot of things with A. Ray, and I was the attorney for the team and all things like that. So he calls me and he says, Dick, we got a real problem. Come out here. And he took me out under the stands at the county stadium where we played our games. It was all wooden stands built by the WPA back in the 1930s and just ready to fall down. I mean, everything was rotting out. So we went to the county, and the county said, well, it's your ballpark. You play there. You fix it. We said, we're not about to do that. We're not about to do that. And we said, is that your last and best response? And they said, that's right. We're not going to do it. So A. Ray, he knew people all over baseball. He went and made a deal to move our team to the New Orleans Superdome, which is, of course, is an NFL football field. And for the season of 1979, we played in the Superdome. The day of opening day of the season, we had a Mardi Gras type parade up Canal Street in New Orleans, if you can imagine that. They took us in open arms, and they supported us, and we did pretty well. But at the end of the season, A. Ray called me in again. He said, you know, Dick, he said, I don't think we ought to plan on staying in the Superdome long term. 2 reasons. It's too big for AAA ball, and the attendance started to gradually decline through the season. The enthusiasm of the population declined. And secondly, the football field was not really designed for baseball. So he said, I found out that the baseball team, the professional team at a stadium in Louisville, Kentucky, is going out of business, and there's going to be an opening on that stadium. And we could move the Oilers there and probably do pretty well in Louisville. So he and I went up to Louisville and negotiated with the town fathers. And they gave us a good deal on the stadium. And we moved the team there for the season of 1980. And for the first 3 seasons, we outdrew 3 major league teams. It was so successful. I mean, you talk about support by the town. And the Cardinals gave us an excellent team. We won the pennant 2 of those 3 years. And it was just, you know, really, really a success. And I was happy to be a part of it. And I helped A. Ray get all of the details done on the lease for the stadium, and really worked hard trying to keep that thing going. And we changed the name from the Tulsa Oilers, obviously. We'd called them the Oilers down in New Orleans, but we changed the name of the team to the Louisville Cardinals, which was appropriate for the Cardinals. And they liked that idea, too. And so that was a successful program. And at the end of the 4th year, the town fathers in Louisville, with whom we'd negotiated this lease, and it still had about 6 years to go on it, they came to us and they said, we want to buy your company. We want to buy the team. So Ray and I went to the other stockholders and we said, that's what they want to do, and they're offering us a good price. So we sold the Tulsa team, which was now the Louisville Cardinals, to the town fathers of Louisville. And that was the end of AAA baseball for me for the rest of my life. Okay, go back a couple of years. 1980, the Sonberg family moved from Tulsa to Hilton Head Island. We bought a house in Sea Pines on Calabogie Cay, and we moved here. Our oldest son was going off to college. We enrolled our two younger children at the Sea Pines Prep, now called Hilton Head Prep, and ensconced down on Calabogie Cay and became very happy on Hilton Head. So we were living here. That began in 1980. In 1982, the Atlanta Braves had a AA team in Savannah at the Grayson Stadium. And they elected to move it to Charlotte, to a new stadium, which opened up the Grayson Stadium. And again, Ray calls me. I don't know how he finds out about all these things. He says the Cardinals want another single A team, and they want it in the southeast part of the country. We could put it in the South Atlantic League, which covers parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So let's see if we can't negotiate a good lease on that stadium in Savannah and put a team there. So I went over and met with the mayor and negotiated a good lease. And we signed it up, and we arranged to put a team, the Savannah Cardinals, at Grayson Stadium in Savannah for the year beginning 1983. And we ran it for 3 years. And we hired a general manager. I was the president of the corporation that we set up, and we had several other stockholders. But we hired a general manager who was an experienced baseball manager type, and he ran the team for us on a day-to-day basis. And the Cardinals gave us good players again. It was a lot of fun. And at the end of the third year, I got a call right after the season ended from a guy in Louisville by the name of Will May, who was a guy about my age. So he was, middle-aged at that time. And he was one of the persons in the group that had bought our Tulsa Oiler team. He said, "Dick, I want to come down and talk to you about buying your Savannah team." I said, "What do you mean, Will?" He said, I'm just a part owner of the Louisville team. In fact, a very small owner. I've always wanted to own a baseball team in my own name. And I've got the money to do it, so I'm going to come down and make a deal with you. So Will came down and we had dinner. We made a deal. And I sold him the Savannah Cardinals. And all the other stockholders were very happy because we sold at a good price again. And it was very successful end of the tenure of the Savannah Cardinals. And he ran it for about 3 years. And then he sold it. I don't know why. And the new owners changed the name to the Savannah Sand Gnats. And maybe many of you have heard of the Savannah Sand Gnats. And that was a different team, and it was not a Cardinal team, and they didn't get very good players, and it didn't do very well. But our Savannah Cardinals team that we did had a good experience. So that's the end of my professional baseball career. And here we are at Hilton Head. That was like 1987. And I'm basically out of the oil business because it's not a good place to invest anymore. And I'm out of the baseball business. And I'm sitting here on Hilton Head wondering what I'm going to do, although I'm still practicing law in Tulsa. In fact, I was still commuting to Tulsa almost every week, much to the dismay of dear Katie. She didn't like that idea. But just a side point, when Delta started their Sky Miles program, I was the first million miler on Hilton Head. Shows you how many miles I put on that airline. I'm not sure after what the president did the other day, Delta did. I don't think I'll fly him again. But anyway, my 1990, my 3 children are out of school, and they're doing certain jobs, but they'd love to live on Hilton Head and work here. And so I said to them, had a little meeting, and I said, look, I'll see if I can find a business that we can buy that'll be a family business, and you all will be the active participants in it, and all I'll do is kind of keep the accounting straight and make sure you're going straight. So I looked around, and in December of 1990, I learned about a business for sale at South Beach Marina on Hilton Head in Sea Pines. Island Water Sports. It was a boat rental business. And the young couple who owned it were getting a divorce, and in the decree, it required that they sell the business and split the proceeds. So I was able to negotiate a good deal to buy Island Water Sports, which was a good active rental business at South Beach Marina. It rented powerboats, jet skis, kayaks, and a couple of small sailboats that were in the inventory when I bought it. And I put my kids in charge of running it, and that first year, in 1991, it did very well, and they were very happy, and everything was going pretty good. So I went up to Harbortown Marina in Sea Pines, and I talked to the harbor master there, and I negotiated a lease to rent boats out of Harbortown. So 1992, we added Harbortown, and one of my kids went up there and ran that operation. And that turned out well. So in 1993, I went up and I negotiated a water sports lease at Shelter Cove Marina, and for a commercial dock out in the north end next to Hudson's Restaurant. So there we are, 4 locations, and only 3 kids to run them. So believe me, it kept me busy, and I worked hard at it. And we hired a lot of additional employees to run these operations. There were a lot of summer students here, here college kids here during the summer that were looking for jobs, and they loved working on the docks. So it wasn't a problem to get the necessary employees, and the business really prospered. 1996, South Beach Marina, the owner comes to us. He wants to sell the marina. So there were 2 other families operating water sports type operations down there at South Beach Marina at the same time. They weren't direct competitors of ours, but they had water sports type of operations, and they were interested in the marina. So we made a deal, the 3 of us would go together and buy the marina and operate it, which was a good idea. We bought it, we put the money in, each put a third in. We put some money in to clean it up and paint it. And then we wrote each of our companies a brother-in-law contract or a lease, 25-year leases with the rental way below the market price, so that we could operate our businesses at a really, really good profit. And we owned the marina, so it didn't make any difference to us that the marina wasn't getting what it should out of that lease. And that turned out to be a pretty good purchase, we thought. About 2.5 years later, we realized that South Beach Marina was sludging in, filling in with mud. Every time the slack tide came in and stopped, a certain amount of silt would fall out and accumulate in the marina basin. The water around Hilton Head, both the ocean and the sound behind us, is just full of silt. And every time the tide changes, some of that silt falls out. So that was a problem. But we thought, well, we can get this dredged pretty quickly, because it had been dredged in 1988 without any problems. We knew about that. That was before we owned it, but we knew it had happened. So I set up a South Island Marine corporation to handle the dredging project. And I went, you needed permits from two agencies, Corps of Engineers, which is headquartered in Charleston for South Carolina, and also from the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, headquartered in Columbia. So I went up first and talked to the person at the Corps of Engineers in Charleston about getting the permit. And it was a young lady who had been working for the Corps way back since 1988, so she knew how successfully it had been done at that time with no problems. And she said, "Dick, we can get you a permit, but you've got to get the permit from the state before I can issue one." So I go to Columbia, and boy, that was a different story. I go into the permit department at DNR, and there's two guys there that were in charge of giving out the permits, and you talk about negative, they were triple negative. And I had a really hard time even discussing it with them. And about a month later, they called me and they said, "We've received an objection to dredging permits at South Beach Marina and Harbor Town." And I said, "Objections from whom?" He said, "Well, they're residents of Sea Pines, about 8 of them." And I said, "Oh boy, environmentalists are after me." So I had to figure out a way to get around this problem. I hired a dredging consultant in Columbia who regularly consulted on dredging projects for marinas all over the state, very experienced, and he knew his way around DNR. And he brought in a consultant from the Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where the dredging for the Corps of Engineers on the Mississippi is headquartered. And that guy was really an expert. And without him, we'd never have gotten the permits. It took us 3 years of negotiations and really fighting for our lives. In the meantime, the marina was almost completely silted in. We finally got the permits, and we did the dredging. We pumped it out. The dredger pumped it out through a 12-inch flexible pipe that went down 2 miles south of Hilton Head to a disposal site out into water. And that's where we put the spoils that we dredged out of the 2 marinas, and actually another marina in Sea Pines called Cove Marina, privately owned, and they participated. And we got all the dredging done, and lo and behold, the environmentalists were wrong, and our science was right. There's a lot of nutrients in that pluff mud that collects in these marinas, and it's very beneficial to the marine life. And after we got that pluff mud stacking out there at that location, south of Hilton Head, the crabs and the clams and the mussels and the flounder and the snapper and the tilapia and all the bottom life fish just prospered and were all over the place. And even the shark and the dolphin were there. They just loved that area because of the nutrients in the water, and it was very, very beneficial to everybody. So obviously, we had a good, successful dredging project, and now the owners of the marina, Harbor Town, South Beach, and so forth, they can get a permit every 10 years without any problems because everybody knows that it's a good way to handle the collection of the silt at these marinas. So that was a good solution to the dredging problem. And Island Water Sports prospered during the 2000s after we got the dredging done. And 2011, in December, Bob Gossett came to me. Bob Gossett owns Salty Dog Company here on the island. Salty Dog T-shirts. He owns all of South Beach Marina. And he owns a lot of other things around here. Very successful businessman. And Bob said, "Dick," he said, "you've got a long-term lease here in South Beach Marina. I want to buy you out. I want to own everything in South Beach Marina." So I said, "Well, my kids are starting to get past the point where they want to operate this business anymore. And I think maybe we could make a deal if you offer me the right price." So I went and talked to my kids, and they agreed that if we could sell it at a good price, we should do so. And we negotiated, and Bob, again, he made an offer I couldn't refuse. Several times what I expected to get, for sure. And we sold the business in the 2012 to Bob Gossett's Salty Dog Company. And that was the end of Island Water Sports. I gave up the lease at Harbor Town. I'd already terminated the leases at Shelter Cove in the North End. So we were out of business. And I am out of business. So one other aspect of my life here in Hilton Head I'll tell you about, which is kind of entrepreneurial, but nonprofit. When I moved here in 1980, I started playing tennis at Hilton Head, the Sea Pines Country Club where we lived. And I had a lot of fun at it. And in 1989, we organized a team and put it in the USTA League, which we'd never done before. And USTA tennis was just starting to build on Hilton Head. It never had been very big in this whole area before that. And in 1990, our team won the state championship. So, we were doing pretty well. And I thought to myself, I had a lot of time on my hands, frankly, certain parts of the year anyway. And I thought, the clubs on the island, other than the USTA League, they never play against each other. There's no competition. And you never see these other guys. And it's not the way it should be. So, in the spring of 1991, I went around to the pros on every tennis club on the island, which I think there were about 8 or 9 at that time, and proposed to set up a independent interclub league for seniors over 55, which is the same age that you had to play in USTA. So it would be an adjunct to USTA, and we'd get to know each other at these different clubs and play against each other. And it would be a good way to further develop tennis on the island. And so I got the support of all the pros. And I set up the league, and I set up the schedule, and we had the first year, and I kept all the scores, and everybody was happy. And for the second year, I brought in additional teams from Beaufort, Kalawasi, Fripp Island, just added other teams, and we got it up to eventually 16 teams. And it was a very, very successful interclub league, and I hope it's still going. I don't know, because when I sold Island Water Sports in 2012, I'd also had my fill of running that league. It was very time-consuming. I had to keep all the scores for 16 matches every week. I had to send out a report to all the captains, and it just was tiresome. So I found somebody at Hilton Head Plantation who agreed to take over the running of the league, and that was in 2012, and I resigned from my position as president of the league. And so I continued to play tennis after that, but I certainly didn't run the league anymore. So that's almost the end of my time here, but I've got about 5 minutes. I told you I wasn't going to tell you anything about my legal career, other than the fact that I did work for these law firms and had my own law firm. I want to tell you about one aspect of my practice that, frankly, I'm very proud of, and I think I did a very good job of bringing some people to justice. In 1974 or 75, either one, Lee Keeling, the consulting engineer whom I represented, Lee called me and he said, "Dick, I've got some people over here in the office. You need to come over and meet them." So I went into his office and into their conference room where Lee was, and there were 3 medical doctors from Nashville, Tennessee. And they were all, in their 50s, and seemingly astute people. And they were. But they had been investing for about 7 years in annual limited partnerships with a company called Homestake Production Company, which was headquartered in Tulsa, independent company, owned and operated by Bob Trippett, who was something of a character of his own right. But anyway, they had, after the last 2 years of the results they were getting on their investments, they were getting suspicious about what was going on in these programs. So they took all of their documents to Lee Keeling's office, and the engineers and geologists in Keeling's office examined everything, and they came up with a conclusion that despite the fact that Trippett told everybody at the end of every year of all these successes and all these producing wells and all this oil and gas revenue, he was having very terrible results, very low production, very few producing wells. And in effect, he was ripping people off. So I said, well, let me examine it. Let me figure out what's going on here. And so I started examining the financial aspects of it. And what I discovered was Bob Trippett was running a Ponzi scandal. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of Ponzi recently with Bernie Maddox in New York. And that's a deal where somebody has a program, consecutive years, and he takes the money brought in, say, in 1975, and pays back some of it to those in 74 and 73 to keep them happy, so they'll again invest in 75 and 76 and so on. And it's a pyramid scheme called a Ponzi scheme after Frank Ponzi, who was a notorious guy back in the 30s. So anyway, it became very clear to me it was a Ponzi scheme. And I went to a friend of mine who was an accountant, and he examined it, and he agreed. So I went to Bob Trippett, and he'd known me from Adam. And we met in his office, and I told him, I said, Mr. Trippett, you're running a Ponzi scheme, and I've got 3 clients from Memphis, Tennessee, and we're going to sue you if you don't give them all their money back plus a profit so they can get out of this scheme. And he said, Sonberg, just get out the door, will you? You don't know what you're talking about. So I got out the door, and I'd already had a lawsuit prepared to file because I figured that's what he'd do. And I filed it at the federal court the next day. So there I was back in the litigation from my old days at Houston Klein Davidson. And I did know my way to the courthouse. And I did some discovery. And after about 3 months in trading documents back and forth, the lawyer at a big law firm who was representing Trippett called me, and he was a friend of mine. I knew him casually, you know, not through too much practice, but as a friendship. And he said, Dick, he said, we want to settle this lawsuit. I said, well, you're going to have to make a good offer to my clients in Memphis. And I told him what I wanted. And he said, well, that's pretty steep. And I said, well, it's either that or we're going to go down the path on litigation, and I think the judge will tear them apart. So he went back to Trippett, and 2 days later came back and said, we'll settle on the terms you offered. So I got my clients all their money back and a good profit on top of it, and they were done with Homestake Production Company. But about 2 months later, I get a call from a person that I'd never heard of in New York City, another medical doctor. And he was a physician at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And he and 2 of his buddies had been investing almost over the same period of time with Trippett's company, Homestake Production. And they had learned about my lawsuit. And he said, what happened to your lawsuit, Mr. Sonberg? And I said, I settled it and got my clients out of it. I said, and they were doctors too. He said, well, I had heard that. He said, we want to get out of that deal, but we want to get our money back. And I said, I'll get you your money back, don't worry. So I went to the lawyer who had represented Trippett in the prior lawsuit and told him again what I had and what I wanted to do. And he said, we'll get you the same kind of a deal. We'll get you out of here, just keep quiet. Keep quiet. Right as we were negotiating and finalizing the settlement deal, I get a call from a lawyer at a big law firm in Los Angeles. And he represents celebrities, movie stars. Trippett had gotten into the door in Hollywood and raised money over the last 4 or 5 years to put into these partnerships, and that's what he was spinning back off to the other people to keep them happy. And this lawyer said, I've heard all about your lawsuits over there in Oklahoma against Trippett. He said, I want to join in. I said, well, I've settled mine, but you could have your own. So he filed his lawsuit and put Trippett in jail and put into bankruptcy. So that was the end of that deal. But that was my success as a litigation lawyer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm really kind of proud of it. So anyway, I'm glad you all came. I hope you enjoyed listening to me. This is the first time I've had a tie on in 6 months, I think. But the lawyer in me said, wear one. So I appreciate your coming, and I enjoyed talking to you. And now let's go to the dining room, have a glass of wine and a good meal, and enjoy ourselves. Thank you.